the day everything changed. It was supposed to be a routine visit to the hospital. I, Margaret, had come in for pre-surgery consultations ahead of my hip surgery scheduled for the next day. At 67 years old, life hadn't exactly been kind to me physically, but emotionally, well, that's where the story begins. As I went through the sterile hallways of St. Mary's Hospital, something, or rather someone, caught my eye. It was Patrick, my husband of nearly 4 decades. He emerged from an elevator with his usual confident stride, but instead of heading toward my room as he should have, he turned down another corridor and disappeared into a private patient suite. My heart skipped a beat. What business did Patrick have visiting someone else when he knew I was here preparing for major surgery? Curiosity quickly morphed into suspicion. Without thinking twice, I followed him quietly, careful not to make my presence known. As I approached the slightly open door of the room, what I saw inside stopped me cold. There stood Patrick, embracing none other than Eliza, my best friend since college. And on the bed lay Brian, her son, recuperating from some sort of accident. The scene before me felt surreal. Why was Patrick comforting Eliza like they shared more than mere friendship? Why was he even in Brian's hospital room? A million questions swirled in my mind, each one sharper than the last. Something wasn't right, and it gnawed at me like a relentless ache. Determined to uncover the truth, I decided to do what any betrayed spouse might. I started snooping. That same evening, I discreetly paid a nurse to dig up whatever information she could about Patrick's connection to Brian. It seemed unlikely that a casual visitor would have access to such intimate family moments, so there had to be more beneath the surface. By morning, the nurse delivered the first piece of shocking news. Apparently, Patrick had donated blood to Brian after his accident. But why? Why hadn't Eliza asked me first? We were best friends, confidantes who had weathered every storm together, or so I thought. Yet somehow, she went straight to my husband without batting an eyelash. But the real bombshell came later that day while I was being prepped for my surgery. The nurse returned with additional details that left me reeling. According to hospital records, Patrick wasn't just a random donor. He was listed as Brian's biological father. My world tilted on its axis. How could this be possible? I'd watched Eliza struggle alongside her late husband, James, for years to conceive a child. When Brian finally came into their lives, we celebrated together. After James passed away 7 years ago, I promised Eliza she could always count on Patrick and me for support. Now, it all made sickening sense. They didn't need my support because they already had each other. Betrayal sliced through me like a knife. Tears welled up uncontrollably, blurring my vision as the weight of their deceit crashed over me. The nurse noticed and asked if I was okay. Yes, I lied weakly. Just pain. Physically, yes. My hips throbbed from the fall that brought me here. A fall caused by water mysteriously spilled on my steps, but the emotional agony far outweighed anything physical. Patrick walked into the room moments later, oblivious to the turmoil raging inside me. "Ready for the big day tomorrow?" he asked cheerfully. His voice grated against my raw nerves. I forced myself to nod, avoiding his eyes lest I lose control and confront him then and there. No, I couldn't act rashly. This revelation demanded careful planning. If Eliza and Patrick believed they could betray me so callously, then they had no idea what awaited them. For now, I stayed calm, biding my time. Revenge may be a dish best served cold, but plotting it required precision and patience. Little did I know, the worst was yet to come. The days following my discovery were a blur of pain, both physical and emotional. My hip surgery went ahead as planned, but lying in that hospital bed, the weight of Patrick and Eliza's betrayal pressed heavily on me. Every creak of the door made my heart race, fearing it might be one of them coming to check up on me, all the while hiding their dark secret. Each moment, Patrick sat by my bedside, pretending to care for me, felt like a dagger twisting deeper into my soul. Recovery at home was no easier. With Patrick hovering around, I couldn't let him see the turmoil within me. So I put on a brave face, forcing smiles and pretending everything was fine. But inside, I was crumbling. Whenever he left the house, my mind raced with images of him sneaking off to see Eliza and Brian. Was he holding Brian's hand, teaching him things only a father could? Were they laughing about how easily they had deceived me? These thoughts haunted me day and night, fueling a fire of bitterness and resentment. To distract myself, I began piecing together memories from the past, trying to make sense of how this betrayal had festered under my nose for so long. Eliza and I had been inseparable since our college days. We had shared everything, our dreams, fears, joys, and sorrows. As sorority sisters, we chose to bunk together, taking the same classes just to spend more time with each other. Our bond was unbreakable, or so I thought. Eliza's life hadn't been easy. She fell pregnant shortly after meeting James, and though her stern pastor father insisted they marry quickly to avoid scandal, the marriage was doomed from the start. Just months later, she miscarried, shattering any hope of love between them. Still bound by duty and her father's iron will, Eliza stayed with James despite her unhappiness. They tried for years to have another child, though I always sensed her heart wasn't fully in it. Perhaps losing that first baby had scarred her more deeply than I realized. Then there was Patrick. Handsome, charming Patrick. Eliza had introduced us at her office's end-of-year party. From the moment I saw him, I was smitten. Yet even then, something about their dynamic struck me as odd. Eliza warned me against him, calling him a flirt who charmed every woman in sight. At the time, I dismissed her warnings, thinking she was just being protective. Now, I wondered if her warnings were less about concern for me and more about staking her claim. Our whirlwind romance led to marriage within 5 months of meeting. Patrick was attentive, kind, and seemingly devoted. For a while, life felt perfect. But perfection has a way of cracking under pressure. When I suffered my first miscarriage, it devastated me. 6 pregnancies followed, each ending in heartbreak. Through it all, Eliza stood by my side, offering comfort and support. Or so I believed. Adopting Cecilia filled some of the void, but deep down, I knew Patrick yearned for a biological child. He never said it outright, but the longing was there, buried beneath his smile and gentle words. And now, knowing that Brian was his son, and that Eliza had kept this truth hidden for decades, made every loss feel like a cruel joke orchestrated by the 2 people I trusted most. As weeks passed, the pain of their deceit consumed me. Sleepless nights became my norm, tears soaking my pillow as I grappled with the magnitude of their betrayal. How could Eliza, my best friend, stand by and watch me suffer through 7 miscarriages without guilt? How could Patrick, the man I vowed to love forever, remain silent as I grieved time and again? One evening, unable to bear the silence any longer, I decided to confront the truth head-on. While Patrick ran errands, I visited Brian, still recovering from his accident. Sitting beside him, I marveled at how much he resembled Patrick. The same jawline, the same piercing eyes. The resemblance was undeniable. As casually as possible, I asked Brian about his recovery, making small talk until I found an opportunity to swipe the glass he'd used for water. Tucking it carefully into my purse, I left before anyone noticed. Back home, I retrieved a wine glass Patrick had used earlier that day. The next morning, I sent both items to a private lab for DNA analysis. Though I already suspected the outcome, seeing the confirmation in black and white hit me like a freight train. Brian was indeed Patrick's son. The final piece of evidence solidified what I already knew. My husband and my best friend had built a life together behind my back, leaving me utterly blindsided. Armed with this knowledge, I resolved to take action. I hired a private investigator to dig deeper into Patrick and Eliza's lives. If they thought they could destroy mine, they were gravely mistaken. Revenge may not bring back the years I lost or heal the wounds they inflicted, but it would ensure they paid for their sins. Little did I know the revelations awaiting me would cut far deeper than anything I'd imagined thus far. Recovery from my hip surgery was slow and grueling, but the physical pain paled in comparison to the emotional wounds festering inside me. Every time Patrick left the house, whether for work or errands, I couldn't shake the image of him sneaking off to see Eliza and Brian. My mind replayed their embrace in that hospital room over and over again, taunting me with questions I wasn't ready to confront. How long had this been going on? Did they laugh at my naivety behind closed doors? Were they planning to elope anytime soon? Each day felt like a lifetime, as I wrestled with anger, betrayal, and heartbreak. Yet, outwardly, I maintained an eerie calm. Inside, however, a storm brewed. I resolved not to let them destroy me without a fight. If Patrick and Eliza thought they could trample on my life so carelessly, they underestimated just how far I'd go to make them pay. Once I was mobile enough to move around without assistance, I decided it was time to gather more evidence. The DNA results confirmed what I already suspected. Brian was Patrick's son. But there were still gaps in the story, pieces of the puzzle I needed to fit together before taking my revenge. So, I hired a private investigator named Marcus, a discreet professional recommended by a friend who owed me a favor. I gave Marcus strict instructions: follow Patrick and Eliza, dig into their past interactions, and uncover any secrets they might be hiding. Most importantly, I wanted access to their phones. If there was anything incriminating between them, I knew it would be buried deep within their texts, emails, or calls. Marcus assured me he'd handle everything discreetly, warning me that such surveillance required patience. I didn't have much of that left, but I nodded anyway, pretending to agree. For 2 agonizing weeks, I waited. Each day dragged on endlessly as I played the dutiful wife, pretending nothing was amiss while seething inside. Patrick seemed oblivious to my inner turmoil, which only fueled my resentment further. He went about his routine as usual, occasionally asking if I needed anything or reminding me to take my medication. His feigned concern made me sick. How dare he act like nothing had changed when everything I believed in lay shattered at my feet? Finally, Marcus called me late one evening, instructing me to meet him at a quiet cafe downtown. When I arrived, he slid a thick envelope across the table, his expression grim. "You're not going to like what's in here," he said cautiously. My stomach churned, but I forced myself to remain composed. Whatever was in that envelope, I needed to know. Ignorance no longer felt like bliss. It felt like weakness. Back home, I locked myself in my study, trembling as I opened the envelope. The first document sent chills down my spine, transcripts of conversations between Patrick and Eliza spanning years. According to the transcripts, Patrick and Eliza had begun their affair even before I met him. She hadn't wanted me to date him, let alone marry him, but Patrick had convinced her otherwise, promising he'd never truly belong to anyone else. Their twisted pact ensured that Eliza remained childless during her marriage to James, deliberately sabotaging any chance of conceiving until she fell pregnant with Brian. That revelation alone left me reeling, but it was the next part that shattered whatever fragments of trust I had left. When James discovered Brian wasn't his biological son, through a blood transfusion following a minor accident, he confronted Eliza. At first, she denied it, but eventually she confessed everything. Enraged, James planned to expose her and Patrick publicly. 2 days later, he died in a car accident deemed unfortunate by authorities. Too convenient, indeed. But the worst was yet to come. As I sifted through the documents, my hands began to tremble uncontrollably. There, in black and white, was proof of something I could scarcely believe. Eliza had caused all 7 of my miscarriages. Using antibiotics slipped into my drinks whenever I visited her house. She systematically terminated each pregnancy, ensuring I could never give Patrick the child he supposedly craved. And Patrick? He knew. Every single time I cried myself to sleep, grieving the loss of another unborn baby, he watched silently, complicit in her scheme. She had begged Patrick to get a divorce and be with her, but Patrick never budged. Instead, she made a pact with him that if he chose to stay married to me, then I wouldn't bear any child for him, to which he agreed. The weight of these revelations crushed me. I collapsed onto the floor, clutching the papers tightly as sobs racked my body. 7 miscarriages. 7 times I endured sleepless nights, crippling backaches, and endless doctor visits, all orchestrated by the 2 people I trusted most. All those years of anguish, of blaming myself for being unable to carry a child to term, were lies. Lies carefully crafted by monsters wearing human faces. As the initial wave of grief subsided, rage took its place. Pure, unrelenting fury burned within me, consuming every ounce of sorrow. These weren't just betrayals of the heart. They were crimes against my very soul. And they would pay. Oh, how they would pay. With newfound determination, I reviewed the rest of Marcus's findings. Footage showed Patrick and Eliza covering their tracks shortly after James's death, erasing evidence that might link them to his fatal accident. It was damning proof, but I needed more. Public shaming wouldn't suffice. Justice demanded consequences severe enough to match their sins. That night, I drafted letters addressed to both Patrick and Eliza. Enclosed were copies of the incriminating images, along with a simple ultimatum: confess openly to their crimes, or face public exposure. I signed the letters anonymously, sending them via courier to ensure they'd arrive simultaneously. Then I waited, watching as the guilt gnawed at them. Patrick became increasingly paranoid, flinching at every sound, constantly looking over his shoulder. Eliza stopped visiting altogether, giving flimsy excuses, likely scrambling to cover her tracks. For weeks I observed their unraveling, pretending to be concerned while secretly reveling in their discomfort. But even as I savored their panic, it did little to ease the pain of their betrayal. One evening, Patrick announced he was leaving town for a business trip. His voice wavered as he spoke, betraying the fear lurking beneath his polished exterior. I nodded absently, feigning acceptance, but the moment he stepped out the door, I contacted Marcus. Something about Patrick's departure felt off, too calculated, too rehearsed. Marcus met me outside a nearby store, ushering me into his car. Without a word, he confiscated my phone and car keys, opening them up to reveal tiny listening devices hidden inside. My blood ran cold. "They've been watching us," he said grimly. "But they don't know for sure yet." "How do you know?" I whispered, struggling to steady my breathing. "Patrick called our agency looking for a private investigator," Marcus explained. "If I hadn't handled your case independently, we'd have been compromised." The realization hit me like a freight train. We were running out of time. If Patrick and Eliza suspected I was onto them, they'd strike first and hard. Marcus leaned closer, his voice low and urgent. "We need to make the big move. Now." I exhaled sharply, my resolve hardening. Revenge wasn't just about closure anymore. It was survival. Whatever happened next, I vowed one thing. Patrick and Eliza would never hurt anyone else ever again. The arrest of Eliza sent shockwaves through our small community. Whispers filled the air at grocery stores, church gatherings, and school events. Everyone knew everyone in this town, and scandals like this didn't stay hidden for long. When news broke that Eliza had been charged with James's murder, and worse, that she'd orchestrated my 7 miscarriages, people looked at me differently. Some offered condolences. Others avoided eye contact altogether, unsure how to reconcile the woman they thought they knew with the monster revealed in court documents. Eliza pled guilty almost immediately, sparing herself a trial, but ensuring her fate was sealed. 23 years in prison, a sentence that felt both too harsh and not enough. Too harsh because no amount of time behind bars could undo what she'd done to me, to James, to Brian. Not enough because I wanted her to feel the same pain she'd inflicted on me over those 15 excruciating years. But as much as I hated her, seeing her handcuffed and escorted into a police car left me hollow. Revenge hadn't brought closure. It had only deepened the void inside me. Patrick, however, remained elusive. After fleeing the country shortly before Eliza's arrest, he vanished without a trace. His face appeared on social media, news outlets, and wanted posters across international borders. Interpol flagged him as a person of interest, but every lead turned out to be a dead end. Whether he boarded a plane under a fake identity or slipped away unnoticed, Patrick proved himself to be as cunning as he was cowardly. He abandoned Eliza and Brian without hesitation, running like a scared animal trying to save its own skin.